Definitions of inclusive education have shifted over time, as you all know, and there are still as many interpretations of inclusive education as there are probably people in this webinar today. But it is worth noting in this central question that I put forward here that we are talking about all pupils, regardless of labels or severity of their support need. It is also about learning as well as participating, and that we talk about whole school environments as being inclusive, and that the focus of the question is on supports, and that's what we'll be looking at today. When we shift towards inclusive education in our countries and thinking about providing supports for all learners in general education environments, that comes with a shift from an expert and deficit-based model to a partnership and supports-based model. So, knowing history is important because it helps us understand how a field has evolved, why certain things are considered important, and why others are still difficult. There is no such thing as a clean-cut shift, but rather it's a slow process with elements of the past slowly transforming into something different, but also including moments of regression into the old thinking. So my slide here is not really accurate because the line in the middle will be much more blurry in reality. So in an expert deficit-based model, there is often still a separate field that is called special for learners with a statement or whatever it's called in your country. While in a partnership supports-based model, is embedded in a single and flexible system for all learners with a wide variety of support needs. In a expert and deficit-based model, knowledge and language around are often focused on diagnoses or language around disabilities. While if we're shifting to a support-based model, then the language will be more about competence, what the student can do, and the support needs that we see in the classroom, the support needs of the learner, but also the support needs in the environment. In an expert model, professionals with specialized trainings are considered the experts. While when we start shifting towards more partnership model, every person, also the pupils, can contribute equally to the discussions about supports. In an expert model, knowledge is more seen as static, something that can be passed on from an expert to teams through training and coaching. While in a partnership and supports-based model, there's the thinking is about creating new knowledge repertoires that are needed due to unique circumstances and unique needs that are constantly shifting. In experts models, there's more use of jargon, testing, assessment, and the trainings are often having a disability focus. While when we're shifting to the other model, support needs are seen as ever-changing and need to be continuously adjusted. So the training focus more on strategies that we can use. And then last, in an expert model, families are often seen as receivers of information, and their contributions are often considered biased and unreliable because we think that they're too emotionally attached to be able to contribute. While in a partnership model, it's really essential that families are central to the children's lives, and we see it that way, and we value their contributions to the support-based planning. So within a partnership model, there have been a series of research studies on collaborative support planning, which I would like to talk with you about today. And this happens at the individual and classroom level. Some of these studies I've been involved in, and some of these studies started in the US with Dr. Hunt and her colleagues. So as we know, in most countries, there is a system in place to develop individualized education plans for learners with special needs that outline specific goals. So it could be academic goals, it could be social or communication goals, sensory, physical goals. But that still, if we have a plan like that, that is great, but that still leaves teachers on their own figuring out how will they teach these goals to the students in the context of their daily workings of the classrooms. So that's what support planning is about. So this is especially true for learners whose goals are very different from the rest of the class. So while the success of inclusive education is not only important to think about what we're going to be teaching, but also how are we going to be teaching and how are we going to promote participation so that all learners can be involved. So in some cases, not for all students, we'll have to systematically plan the supports. So the collaborative support planning is a process, as you can see on the slide, that is used by educational team members. No, it's a previous slide. To develop and collaboratively implement plans of support. So it's two types of supports. We're going to be thinking about educational supports, which is, adapted materials or modified instruction, or social and behavior supports, which can be social facilitation by adults or peers or positive behavior support plans and so on. So we're thinking about those kinds of supports in a support planning system. So it's not about the goals, it's about how are we going to support the student achieve their goals in the classroom. The important thing is that, support planning happens in small teams composed of ideally a parent, the teacher, the special education support teacher, and sometimes these small meetings can be led by somebody in the school who's responsible for care. So in Flanders, we call it the care coordinator. Another important element is that these meetings happen regularly and they're short. So it could be monthly, it could be every 6 weeks. Maybe it's 20 minutes to half an hour at a preferred time and location for the people who are going to be involved. Another key element is that these meetings start from what happens daily in the classroom. So we're going to go through classroom activities, and then we're going to keep asking questions about supports. So essential for this to work is that there's brainstorming and consensus around the supports that are needed in these activities to increase the learners' educational and social participation. So again, this is not about figuring out what is this learner going to learn. This is not about goals. It's about how is he going to participate in each of those activities. And then it's important to have an easy to use and dynamic support plan with actionable items. So we don't need a full written out meeting report. We need actions. What are we going to be doing? And then last, well, there's 2 more points, but it's not just about having the plan, it's about mostly implementing the plan. So it's very important that there's accountability, that we know who's going to do what, and then, then we see what's going to work, and then we can throw out what's not working and put in another action. So we need some kind of accountability system also to know who's going to do what. So enough listening for now. If you can go back to the previous one, Gamza. Yeah. Let's go ahead and make a support plan. So I would like you to take out a piece of paper or open an empty doc on your computer, and you can draw a table. And you're going to draw a table with 2 columns, and let's say maybe 10 rows. So on the top of your first column, you will write supports. And then on the top of the second column, you will write person responsible. Okay, are you drawing your support plan? All right, so if we had an interactive session, I would ask you now, what stands out to you about this plan? Because this is really it. And this is something important that I want to, that I want you to see is that this is a very simple plan. We can all do this. It's very well structured. There's individual lines for short actions. And the main thing that I want to convey here is the importance of that there's nothing on it. This is the starting point of support planning. We start with nothing, and then in the conversation the new knowledge is gonna appear. So anyway, if we can move to the next slide, I'll show you. So here's an example of one of the support plans from the studies in the US that was done by my mentor, Dr. Hunt. And what is important we called it then unified plans of support. That's not important what we call it, but what's in red is really important. What's important is that in collaborative work is not to come to the meeting with the answers, but to ask the right questions. So here the question is, how is Jacob, or whatever the name of the student is, doing in circle time, in reading, in writing, in math? And then allow space for dialogue between people who stand to gain the most from this interaction. So like the learner themselves, the teacher, the parents, the person who supports them in the classroom. So the question is really what brings the people into the conversation around what supports are needed for this learner in this class context with this teacher at this time. So in other words, it brings the focus to the here and now, which is ever evolving, right? So the here and now could be that it has been raining for weeks on end and there hardly has been recess outside and everybody in the class is a bit restless. Or maybe in the family of the student we're talking about or the learner we're talking about, there's a new baby born. And so there's a lot of change around that. Or maybe the context is that the teacher feels depressed because she just lost her best friend. Or that this group has a negative reputation and the teacher feels anxious about teaching them, even years before they come into the class. So those are the things that we mean by context. So these things are not always expressed, but they are underlying what's possible. And that's why, the supports will look very different from one classroom to the other, even though it's about the same student or the same learner. So the question is not, what do we know about learners with autism and what they need, and how can we bring it into the class and onto this support plan? That is not at the forefront. This is merely in the back of our minds of, let's say, maybe the support person or somebody with that experience. And if there's one takeaway I hope you get from this presentation is that starting from that empty page that you just drew and changing what is on there continuously is crucial when thinking about supports. So now let's look at some examples from support plans from a study that we did in Flanders. So here's Jacob, and we did the study with 3 pupils in Belgium, and so this is Jacob in the 1st grade. So Jacob is a young man now, but you see him in the picture here in the 1st grade, and the cart of materials that you see in the picture was also something that came out of the support planning meetings, because he had so many things on his desk, and it was always a mess, which made it difficult for him to find things independently. But he also had a teacher who did not like messy desks. So you can see that in the other items on here as well, like, giving Jacob clear messages about moving teachers' materials or having letters in envelopes to make words. So in other words, the support items that are also a response to a teacher who finds tidiness important. So this is not just about Jacob. So that's what support planning means for unique learners in unique contexts. So we can move on to Olivia's plan. So here's some examples of things that Olivia's team came up with. And what I want to point out in this one is the last one and how it is written. So it says, experiment with pairing Olivia with a buddy who can redirect her to work. So we know from a ton of research in inclusive education that using buddies works. So once you know that, it may seem obvious to suggest it as a support. And I've often been in these situations when I'm coaching teams. However, general education teachers often are not used to involving peers in that role, or they fear that it may be disruptive or take away from that pupil's own learning. So what I've learned through 20 years of coaching inclusion projects is that even if you know for sure that something will work, it can only become a support when a teacher or a parent feels comfortable with trying it out. So that is why it was phrased here in a rather careful way. It is not saying, let's set up a full buddy system. No, let's say, it just says, let's experiment with having a peer redirect her in certain things. So I think it's important that's what we mean with making sure that it works for everyone. So now let's move to the next plan. This is Jade, the little girl in the striped shirt who's standing. So at the time of the study, Jade was a 5-year-old who was very creative with her behaviors, let's say, and her interactions with people. So I soon discovered that when I was quietly sitting in the corner of her class doing my research observations, and she took a spoonful of sand out of the sandbox and she poured it over my head. So Jade, at the age of 5, had been expelled already from 2 schools because of her difficult behavior. So, and when we started the study, she spent most of her time on the timeout chair because she was very creative with breaking all of the class rules. So I think we can all relate to the challenge of children like Jade in our classrooms. So in this picture, you see her as the assistant of the teacher, handing out pictures to other children during morning meeting. So the idea of this support came about when the mom was sharing that Jade loves to help setting the table at home. And she says, yeah, and I let her carry the jam over to the table, even though I'm worried that she'll drop it and we'll have jam all over the floor. But she's proud when she can help me set the table. So after hearing that, the teacher just, naturally suggested, oh, maybe I can make her my helper during circle time. So instead of, staying in circle time or morning meeting for 1 minute until she had pulled, the girl's hair next to her and being, sent to the timeout chair, she was able to stay for a much longer time. And what I also noticed is that the peers, because she was handing out the pictures, the peers had to thank her for the pictures. So the peers started to look differently at her and as somebody who was participating in the group. So anyway, so these are just some examples. And, again, if we had an interactive session, I would ask you what stands out about all the supports that you're seeing on here. And the thing is that, so I would hope that then you would say, these are simple things. These are ideas. These ideas are not rocket science. Anyone can come up with them. And they are specific to what goes on in the classroom or issues that have occurred that were difficult for the teacher. They're tied into the learner's interests or style. They're positive. They're written as actions. And they have as much to do with the teacher as the learner. So those are some of the things that we learned from building these support plans. And they continuously change because we go to the next meeting and when we see, okay, is this working? If it is, we keep it. If it's not, we just throw it back out. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of supports that we're talking about. So now I would like to talk a little bit. I'm not here to discuss research with you, but I just want to mention, briefly that, with these 3 learners, we use an observation tool to look at student engagement and also at social interactions. And we looked at it before we implemented a support plan and then after it was being implemented. And we noticed, and the visual is just there to make the slide pretty. But what we noticed is that there was a decrease in times that the student was not engaged in what was going on in the class, and there was an increase in social interactions. So that meant reciprocal interactions and also student-initiated interactions, because as we know, it's really hard for some students to initiate an interaction. Then we also, the qualitative data, we interviewed after doing this for a year. We interviewed the teachers, the families, the support persons who were part of developing these support plans. So they felt that the collaborative support planning was efficient because the meetings were short and to the point and focusing on the needs in the classroom. They also noticed that it raised trust a connection grew through the regular contact that people had, and this system of thinking out loud together and contributing ideas that build on each other from their own knowledge really worked well and raised their trust in each other. Then they felt the process was creative. The interviewees felt it was easy to come up with the new ideas and solutions. And it felt like these ideas just flowed naturally out of the stories that were being shared, just like the one I just shared about Jade. Having a plan with action items, just short sentences, felt clear and got everyone on the same page. So it was good to have something written down, but it was very clear and succinct. So, and the plan was adjusted every time the group came together. And then last, the interviewees felt that it was very practical. They stressed the importance that the solutions were their own. They didn't come from some expert, and they were very flexible and easy to implement. I think it's important to understand that more than anything, collaborative support planning is a way of thinking and can take any form and take many forms. So here again, we shouldn't get tempted to follow a particular format, but focus on the essence and adapt it to our local situations. So the essence is to start from activities throughout the school day, involve families. The creativity and developing new ideas together is essential, and then having regular contact. So as long as you have these elements in some form or formats, you're doing support planning. Also, in secondary schools, as you're probably already thinking, we need different ways to do this because there's way too many teachers. So it would get way too complicated to organize it in meetings. We can use digital platforms to do this thinking. We can have maybe a central person who's connecting with different teachers. We can have notebooks that go back and forth. Again, we need to figure out some way to be thinking about these questions. How is the student doing? How can he be supported? I also want to point out that after the study, we did a rollout in Flanders in Belgium with about first 25 and then another 25 teams. And a lot of learners participated themselves, especially in secondary. And what we learned there is that was really powerful because the learner came up with great ideas, things that the adults would not be thinking of, plus the fact that the learner felt listened to, especially if it was around behavior, and the ideas were theirs, made that they were way more committed to making it successful. So that was a really important component that you can consider when you're setting this up. And I also want to say that support planning is something that happens informally all the time. So we don't have to make it this new special thing. Anytime two teachers at the coffee machine talk about, oh, how is this student doing in your class? I'm having trouble with this. And they're doing support planning. They're exchanging ideas about how to do something, how to involve a student, how to get them to learn better. It happens between parents and teachers. It happens between learners and teachers, between support persons and teachers. So this is a natural thing, and it can take many shapes and forms. Also very important because you think, oh my goodness, this would take forever to have support plans for everyone in the school that needs it. Not every pupil with special needs needs a written out support plan. The thinking around supports will be important for all the for all the learners, but we don't need written out plans for everyone. And then it's really important when we're thinking about this that the focus is on people who get together in social structures and make them learn with and from each other. That's really at the heart of collaborative support planning. By the time I conducted this study, I had been an inclusion coach in Flanders for 10 years. And often parents would call me when there were issues with their child in general education schools. And I would just, whenever I could, I would join whatever meeting. And we would do the same thing. We would brainstorm about how we could move things forward. And it was different every time. But when I thought more deeply about what was happening in these meetings that I had been having for years, but also in this study, it resonated with the theory behind communities of practice. So if we can go to that slide. So Rangier in Canada developed, this is a picture of his first book, this concept of communities of practice. Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and their expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. So I felt that connected very well with what we were doing in those support planning meetings. So in the next slide, you can see that the collaborative support planning meeting aligns well with the main components of communities of practice. The first one is domain. The domain creates the common ground and a sense of common identity. It inspires the members to contribute and participate, and it gives meaning to their actions. So in the collaborative support planning, that's the shared goal of, we want to successfully include this learner, in this unique setting. And we try to make sure the learner is engaged and is learning new things. Then the second component is community. Community is what creates the social fabric of learning. It fosters the interactions based on mutual respect and trust. So this is, what we try to do when we bring people together in a small group. It's team members valuing and building on each other's perspectives and input to figure out how the student is doing and what supports can be put in place. And then the last component of communities of practice is the practice that comes out of it. So it's the specific knowledge that the community develops, this new knowledge, and that they share with each other and they maintain. So in the support planning, it's the items on the action plan are, the feasible supports that are written on the plan and that then are made accessible to implement. So that's kind of the connection between the two models. And you can move to the next slide. So, communities of practice is considers learning as a process of social participation. So this originated outside of the field of education. They discovered, for instance, in a factory, when the CEO, instead of meeting with, the middle management, when they would talk with the workers who were, bolting in the bolts in the cars, that those meetings would be different and would create new knowledge and about how to optimize their systems. Or Rangier, in his book, he worked with insurance claim officers and how they informally kind of figure out together how to deal with certain problems instead of doing that in their formal meetings. So this is something that originated outside of the meetings, outside of education. And it's not just a different term for another type of meeting. It's important to understand the theory and the components behind it. And I know that it has been used in lots of different ways, which often happens with a new term. But I think for the purposes of support planning, it's very important that we have a fundamentally different interpretation of the role of families and learners. Normally, the families are not part of meetings where we're deciding how to teach. So we really change this place of families and see how they can contribute. And any family can do this, because it's based on your knowledge of the child. So in communities of practice, we shift away a little bit from seeing knowledge as static, like, knowledge about autism or about bilingualism, to a social learning theory, which is embedded in practice, what's going on in the classroom, community, people who meet and talk, and also how it ties into identity and meaning. Because we're all changing through this process. So teachers who are engaging in these communities of practice meetings, start changing or shifting their idea of who they are as a teacher, and they start seeing themselves also as teachers of students with certain disabilities or certain behavior needs and so on. So the identity and the meaning piece is really important. And then last, creating these new knowledge repertoires like this changes what we call espoused theory about inclusion, which is the discourse and the beliefs you think you have about inclusion. Like, for example, oh, it only works with these learners or in a small classroom, to theories in use about inclusion. So that's a discourse that comes out of your own behavior and experience. So having these experiences for the teachers is going to be important in how they're shifting their ideas around inclusive education as well. So now I have to stop talking a little bit and give you a break. But we're going to listen to one of the parents who was part of the study and who's she's actually the parent of Jacob, who's also sharing a little bit what this meant for her and what her experience was with communities of practice and with the support planning meetings. So we'll share, I'll share the video with you right now. And it's in Dutch, but it's subtitled in English.
Zou je jezelf even kunnen voorstellen?
Ja, ik ben Mieke Leroy. Ik heb geschiedenis gestudeerd aan de Universiteit van Gent. Ik heb daarna daar ook nog wetenschappelijk onderzoek gedaan gedurende 4 jaar. En toen onze oudste in 1994 geboren werd, ben ik fulltime huisvrouw geworden. Om een aantal privéredenen. We hebben ondertussen 5 kinderen, tussen de leeftijd van 21 en 9 jaar bijna. En sinds de geboorte van Wout, onze zoon met Down-syndroom, ben ik sterk bezig met Down-syndroom Vlaanderen en met heel veel dingen die met inclusie te maken hebben.
Jullie hebben voor Wout met ondersteuningsplanning gewerkt. Hoe werkt ondersteuningsplanning en hoe pakten jullie dit concreet aan?
We zijn daarmee begonnen toen Wout in het eerste leerjaar zat, in september 2007. En dat was op vraag van jou, omdat Wout toen in jouw onderzoek zat. Hoe hebben we dat aangepakt? Wij kwamen om de 4-5 weken, dan nagelang wat paste in de agendas, samen met de klasleerkracht, de ondersteuningsleerkracht zelf. Soms was de zorgcoördinator van de school daarbij en jij was daar ook bij, maar je had een observerende rol, jij was niet actief toen. Hoe pakten we dat aan? Het ging iedere keer over de betrokkenheid van Wout aan het klasgebeuren, hoe konden we dat verhogen? Dus voor taal, Wout was afgeleid bijvoorbeeld door de prentjes in zijn leesboek. Dan maakten we een kaartje, we dekten dat af en op die manier was zijn betrokkenheid een stuk hoger. We deden dat voor rekenen, we deden dat voor neuro, we deden dat voor godsdienst. Maar we deden dat ook niet alleen voor de leervakken, en dat was het sterke van dat plan. Het ging ook over het sociaal gebeuren van Wout, hoe konden we hem daarbij betrekken. Bijvoorbeeld zijn hand leren opsteken in een klasgesprek. Het ging ook over de speelplaats, maar het ging ook over vaardigheden thuis. Op die manier was Wout eigenlijk helemaal gecoverd door de ondersteuningsplan. Dus het was geen doelenplan. Er werd niet gezegd wat Wout zou moeten kunnen tegen het einde van het eerste leerjaar of tweede leerjaar of derde leerjaar. Nee, hoe kunnen we zorgen dat dat doel kan bereikt worden? Daar ging het over.
Ja, wat was de meerwaarde voor Wout? Het feit dat je zo'n ondersteuningsplan had en zo'n actieplan voor de volwassenen eigenlijk.
Ik denk, de betrokkenheid van Wout, maar daar was hij zichzelf niet van bewust uiteraard, maar daar zorgden wij dan wel voor. Maar ik denk dat Wout ook wel voelde op die manier dat er een heel sterke kring rond hem stond. Als er op school iets gebeurde, werd er thuis wel eventjes over gesproken, zowel in het goede als het slechte. Maar ook thuis kreeg een plaats op school. Er werd rekening gehouden met wat er thuis was gebeurd, waardoor dat Wout die dag misschien een beetje minder functioneerde. Die wisselwerking, die vertrouwdheid van thuis met school en school met thuis, dat is een van de sterke punten ook van dat ondersteuningsplan. Dat allemaal een plekje krijgt en dat er op die manier met dat kind gewerkt wordt. Er wordt niet gezegd, het is een met Down, dus hij is koppig, want ze zijn allemaal zo. Nee, thuis loopt het even moeilijk, of hij is zwaar verkouden, of er is thuis iets gebeurd met een broer of zus, dat heeft repercussies op school, dat kreeg daar een plaats.
Ja, dus je komt kort op de bal spelen.
Zeer kort op de bal,
ja. En voor jullie als ouders, hoe ervaren jullie die manier van werken?
Voor mij was dat zo belangrijk en ik draag daar nog de gevolgen van dat mijn kennis, mijn wijsheid over Wout, dat hij daar echt een plek kreeg. Want als je ouder wordt van een kind met een beperking, gaan er allemaal professionelen gaan rechtstaan die komen zeggen hoe je het moet doen. Een logopedist, een kinesist, een thuisbegeleidster. Je krijgt op de duur het gevoel als ouder dat je niks meer weet, want er komen allemaal gestudeerde mensen in huis die je komen zeggen wat je moet doen. Dan denk je, ja oké, hier is mijn rol gedaan, ik mag dat kind alleen nog eten geven, volgens de regels van de logopedist. En ik mag hem laten rechtstaan, volgens de regels van de kinesist. En ik had soms het gevoel, en waar ben ik als moeder? Het is mijn vierde kind, ik weet wel iets over opvoeden. En door dat ondersteuningsoverleg kreeg ik mijn rol als moeder die ook wel iets weet, kreeg ik die volledig terug. En ik kan dat eigenlijk nu al doortrekken tot vandaag, nu wat in het tweede middelbaar zit. Daar wordt nu wel rekening gehouden met mijn kennis over hout en daarin ben ik mogen groeien. Dat is een leerschool voor me geweest, als we dat oefenen in de lagere school.
En was dat evident om als moeder die plaats van iemand die mee problemen of uitdagingen op school kon aanpakken?
Dat was niet evident. Ik heb daar de toelating moeten voor krijgen. Niemand heeft mij gezegd, Mieke, vanaf nu mag je dat doen. Maar door dat concept op school te gaan implementeren, kreeg ik impliciet een toelating om iets te mogen doen. En ik ben er langzaamaan in gegroeid. En ook bij de overgang naar de secundaire school heb ik mij een beetje op de achtergrond gehouden. Ook hoorde hen niet komen zeggen, voilà, en ik ben de moeder en ik wil dat zo en zo. En het zal zo moeten gebeuren. Nee, ik heb mijn rol langzaamaan opgenomen. En nu weet ze dat ik een evenwaardig lid ben van mijn team.
Moet je volgens jou een mondige ouder zijn om dit te kunnen doen?
Nee, absoluut niet. Want als ouder voel je je kind aan, je ziet je kind opstaan, je ziet je kind in het weekend, je ziet je kind 's avonds, je ziet je kind in bad, je ziet je kind op alle mogelijke momenten. En daar zit genoeg materiaal in om te gaan gebruiken op school, om dingen te gaan vertellen. Als je ziet dat je kind thuis, als het in het gezin druk wordt, in elk gezin wordt het wel eens druk, of dat dan nu een mondig gezin is of niet. En je ziet dat je kind als overlevingsstrategie met zijn rug in een hoekje gaat kruipen, zodat hij letterlijk afgesloten is van alles. Dat is een tip die je aan school kan meegeven. Daarvoor moet je niet een mondige moeder of vader zijn. Dat is iets wat gebeurt in je gezin. Je moet wel als team ouders uitnodigen om hen te zeggen, ook elke bijdrage is een nuttige bijdrage, is een waardevolle bijdrage. Ik ben een denkmama, een praatmama, geen doemama, maar ik heb 2 linkerhanden. Maar als je een doemama of doepapa bent, ja, gebruik die know-how van die ouders om aan de slag te gaan.
Dus elke ouder die zijn kind kent, kan bijdragen omdat over die praktische dingen gaat.
En leer het ouders om dat te mogen en te kunnen.
Ja. Maar het is belangrijk inderdaad om uitgenodigd te worden om die dingen te delen.
Ja, want ik denk dat voor leerkrachten nog altijd niet evident is om de wijsheid en de kennis van een ouder mee te pakken in een leerproces. Als je het voorzichtig aanbrengt, gebeurt dat steeds meer. Dankjewel, ik zal er rekening mee houden. Leerkrachten zijn zo niet opgeleid. Ik alleen in mijn klas, ik zal het wel doen.
Oké. Kun je misschien een aantal voorbeelden geven van dingen waarin dat je als ouder het verschil hebt kunnen maken in het gesprek of in de zoektocht naar ondersteuningsitems?
Ja, zeker. Bijvoorbeeld in het 3e leerjaar kregen de kinderen les over de euro. En dan werd er gezegd door de leerkrachten, ja kijk, als niet mee kan met rekenen, als er geen alternatief is in de rekenles, we zullen een euro-oefeningen geven, want hij heeft dat later nodig en anders zullen de mensen hem bedriegen. En ja, je weet wel, die zelfredzaamheid van het buitengewoon onderwijs voor kinderen met verstandelijke beperking. En dan heb ik het volgende gezegd, omdat ik het verhaal ken van een jongen met Down-syndroom die tot het einde van zijn 6e leerjaar achtervolgd is door die euro's. En thuis noemden ze die euro's de neuro's, gewoon om af te reageren. Toen heb ik dus gezegd aan de leerkrachten van kijk, wie van jullie weet er op zondagochtend als hij slaapdronken naar de bakker gaat om broodjes te kopen voor de zondagochtendontbijt en de bakker zegt het is 17,85 € en je geeft een briefje van 20, hoeveel je moet weerkrijgen en wie telt in een volle bakkerij ook de centen na. Niemand deed dat. Dus Wout zou het wel moeten kunnen, Wout zou vlot met euro's moeten kunnen werken, maar zij doen het zelf niet. Hetzelfde op het einde van een rit door een supermarkt. Wie weet er voor hoeveel er in de kar ligt? Niemand weet dat. Iedereen betaalt met de kaart, maar Wout zou het wel moeten kunnen. En mensen zagen dat in, volgden die logica. En Wout heeft nooit meer euro-oefeningen moeten doen dan andere kinderen. Ik kreeg ook het recht om gewoon euro-oefeningen te maken, net als de rest. Iets anders is dat we vaak ook frustraties van leerkrachten hebben kunnen opvangen binnen dat team. Bijvoorbeeld in het 5e leerjaar had Wout een juf die heel strikt is, heel sterk wil dat de kinderen meteen aan de slag gaan, 's ochtends in de klas. Wout heeft tijd nodig om op zijn gemak te komen, om zich aan te passen aan het klasgebeuren. En ja, hoe meer Wout tijd nodig had, hoe meer Juf eiste dat hij aan zijn taakje begon, hoe minder Wout wou beginnen. We hebben daar ook heel open kunnen over praten, want het draait allemaal rond communicatie hoor, in dat ondersteuningsoverleg. En dan hebben we een systeem bedacht dat er heel eenvoudige taakjes op Wout zijn lessenaar lagen. Er lag ook een duidelijke boodschap bij, dat als er geen ondersteuning was, dat Wout die taak moest maken. Heel simpel. Het probleem was opgelost. En dat is net het leuke. Je kan in vertrouwen met elkaar in gesprek gaan. Er is boosheid geweest in die overlegmomenten. Er is verdriet geweest. Er is vooral heel veel vreugde en plezier geweest. Heel veel gelachen op die moment. Maar vooral het woord vertrouwen en open communicatie. En als dat lukt, dan kan je heel veel bereiken.
Ja, en het is inderdaad ook niet alleen de noden van Wout op zo'n momenten, op klasmomenten, maar ook wat zijn verwachtingen van de juf en hoe wil zij haar. Dus die context wordt eigenlijk meegenomen en in functie van die dingen wordt er een oplossing.
Ja, tuurlijk, want als juf zich dan goed voelt met Wout, dan voelt Wout zich ook goed. En een keer als dat probleem opgelost was in het tweede leren, zag je die twee samen mooi evolueren.
Dus het is ook even goed belangrijk, wat is er belangrijk voor de juf?
Ja.
En hoe wil zij daar dingen organiseren?
Het is een win-win situatie. Nu in het begin denken leerkrachten, help, weer al eens samen zitten. Naast het doelenplan moeten we nu ook nog over een ondersteuningsplan gaan denken. Maar veel leerkrachten zijn achteraf, het is eigenlijk winnen dat we doen, door toch om de 4-5 weken een klein uurtje samen te zetten.
Oké.
En in het begin is dat een beetje stroef, is dat een beetje van, ja, wat gaan we nu weer moeten doen? Maar dan zien leerkrachten dat de afspraken die we maken om Wout te betrekken bij het klasgroep, dat wel werkt. Dat wij de dingen maken die afgesproken zijn, dat de leerkracht doet wat afgesproken is, dat ze na een maand kan zeggen, ja, dat heeft echt wel gewerkt. Er waren ook dingen die niet werkten, en die zweerden er gewoon weer van. Zo eerlijk moet je zijn.
Dus het was echt ondersteunend ook naar die klaswerking van die leerkracht. Ja,
zeker.
En ik begrijp ook dat de momenten waren ook bewust kort gehouden, dus het was geen lange vergadering.
Nee, en ook op het moment dat het past. Soms was dat na de school, soms was het over de middag, al naar gelang van wat paste voor de leerkracht. De ene leerkracht zei, ik wil het alleen over taal hebben, want daar zit nu een knoop. Andere leerkrachten wilden het hele plan doorlopen. Je moet je aanpassen aan de leerkracht.
Nu, je hoort vaak van leerkrachten dat ze de expertise niet in huis hebben om een kind met een beperking in de klas te integreren. Had je het gevoel dat de leerkrachten weinig ideeën of oplossingen hadden, of dat dingen waren die vreemd waren voor hen?
In het begin moet je ze overtuigen om te zeggen dat ze wel heel veel kunnen. Want leerkrachten denken altijd dat ze niets kunnen, maar dat is niet
waar. Of
dat het heel speciaal is dat onze kinderen van
Mars komen. Speciaal para trabalhare, parece que os miúdos
vienen de Marte, por ejemplo.
E hanno bisogno di un qualche trattamento specifico, ma io devo dire...
Je hebt expertise opgedaan, dat zit in je rugzak, haal het er ook uit voor Wout en gebruik dat. En waar leerkrachten ook heel opgelucht over zijn, is als je zegt, je mag een fout maken. Je mag herbeginnen. Wij zijn ook als ouders vaak fout. Dan herbeginnen we. Dit is onze weg, maar als dat niet lukt, keren we terug. En doen we een nieuwe poging. En dat is dan, door de vertrouwdheid van dat ondersteuningsoverleg, mag je en kan je fouten maken. En herbeginnen. Niemand neemt het je kwalijk, want iedereen gaat ervan uit, we doen ons best.
Ja, Wout zit nu in het middelbaar en heeft nu verschillende leerkrachten. Hebben jullie deze manier van werken of aspecten daaruit kunnen doortrekken naar de middelbare school? Of, hoe zijn jullie nu met aanpassingen bezig?
Het ondersteuningsoverleg op zich doen we niet meer, omdat we met zodanig veel mensen zijn. En ook een teamoverleg is al heel moeilijk. Ik heb zelfs het gevoel dat de leerkrachten denken, oh ja, dat loopt. En ze trekken een plan, want ze zitten tijdens teamoverleg onderling te babbelen. Ze hebben er alle vertrouwen in, waar ze in het begin ook heel bang waren. Maar de expertise die we opgedaan hebben, de ondersteuningsleerkracht en ikzelf in de lagere school, die gebruiken we nu wel. En ik ga steeds meer dingen opnemen op school, zonder te zeggen, ik ben het, ik weet het, ik kan het, ik hou mij wel op. Ik blijf op mijn plaats staan als ouder. Maar leerkrachten ontdekken stilletjes aan dat de suggesties die ik doe, de voorbereidingen die ik doe, dat die toch wel waardevol zijn, dat die zinvol zijn.
Dus eigenlijk heb je door de manier van werken, ben je blijven in communicatie gaan met de school, maar dan via een ander medium dan het overlegmoment.
Ja, en ook
suggesties te doen rond aanpassingen of hoe dat we dingen kunnen aanpakken.
En ik durf het ook doen. Ik zit niet te denken, zou ik dat wel doen? Mag ik dat wel doen? Wat gaat die meneer denken? Nee, ik doe het. En dan zien we wel wat de reactie is. Maar ik vind dat ik redenen heb, of dat ik geleerd heb, dat mijn redenen ook valabele redenen zijn om een suggestie tot aanpassing te doen.
Ja, en nog tenslotte, welk advies heb je voor scholen en ouders die zouden willen starten met zo'n manier van werken?
Doe het gewoon. Gooi je, zwem. En zorg dat er een paar radars aan de kant staan. Maar doe het gewoon omdat de communicatie, de open communicatie, de eerlijke communicatie en de band van vertrouwen die je creëert op die manier, is zo belangrijk voor iedereen. Leerkrachten groeien van, ik kan dat. Kinderen zijn betrokken. Een betrokken kind stimuleert de juf. Een gestimuleerde juf stimuleert een leerling. Het is een wisselwerking die onvoorstelbaar werkt. Je kan het alleen niet altijd objectiveren, maar je ziet het gewoon.
Oké, dankjewel.
So this was Mika's story. And, this leads us to talk a little bit about, we can go to the next slide, about the importance of the parent perspective. And, there's a whole bunch of research on family school partnerships that would be a whole nother separate presentation. But I just want to point out the work of Anne and Rudd Turnbull, their parents also of a young man with disabilities, but they have done a ton of research with all kinds of families from different backgrounds. And through all their work, they found that these 7 main principles for effective family school partnerships that, with the trust in the middle. And, if you look at what these are, you can see, a lot of, the things that Mika was sharing as her story as a parent are also part of this visual. So, but I won't go much deeper into that for now. Since we're a lot of policymakers, we're educators who want to create change, I do want to, stop a little bit and talk about, the importance of collaboration and its impact on systems change. So, if we're looking at the collaborative support planning or the community of practice processes, I think what we're learning here is the importance of constructing knowledge as a group for specific children and unique contexts and environments. So that's one main lesson. Then another thing, it's really important, the importance of linking into teachers' biographies. Who is this teacher? What does this teacher need? So every year it'll be different. And of course, the child is changing as well. So everything is constantly changing, but who this teacher is very important. And then also we learned through this process the importance of tapping into the parents and the students' knowledge. We often forget to do that enough. If we really have, and we get into these situations of resistance, and we feel like we can't have that conversation. But if we really ask them the question and they feel like there's a chance to contribute, then a whole different kind of dynamic starts working. So if we think about this in terms of systems change, traditionally in education, changes in education are experienced as top-down or large-scale or pushed onto teachers and schools. Teachers think, oh, yeah, here comes another change. And I've seen many, if they've been in the field for a while. So they tend not to be successful when they don't take into account the experience of the people involved. And that's what the research says. So like the teachers. So there are bigger chances of success of systems change when innovation is linked to meaning making of the individual teacher and to their professional identities. So, and that's what we saw as part of these communities of practice. Through going through this, in a small group, teachers are starting to change their ideas of their professional identity. So when we're looking at Vandenberg's research, for example, it showed that positive change processes take into account insecurities among teachers. So it also, it's successful when the complexity of the innovation is reduced. So if we do a whole meeting and talk about everything around inclusion and what it means and kind of in broad terms, then, it can be overwhelming and it could be something you don't want to do. But when it's reduced to an individual child in a classroom with a particular support system and going a process together, it reduces that complexity and it creates opening. And then also when there's attention given to the development of a supporting vision. So involving teachers in processes like support planning or communities of practice can enhance such a change when it's directly linked to their day-to-day experiences with students who challenge them. And that could be any student, right? So this is how this collaborative work is important as kind of a motor for systems change towards inclusive education as well. And this is my last slide, actually. So thank you so much for listening. Gracias, obrigado, grazie. Building inclusive schools and inclusive societies is a slow process that needs to find a way to grow from the ground up. And through collaborative working, through a lot of talking and collaborative thinking. And that is why I want to end with this quote from Paulo Coelho, and I'll try to read it in Spanish to you. Hasta los árboles más altos proceden de semillas tan pequeñas como estas. Recuérdalo y no te precipites. So don't rush it. This takes time. We need time to grow these inclusive processes, and there's a lot of people involved. So I thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions and comments in the chat, or you can also, of course, email me. And hopefully in the future, we can meet in person and we can start having that next conversation. What does this content mean for you in your classroom, in your system, and what could you start doing with it? So that would be an interesting next conversation to have. Thank you.